Tim Vickery is with us in the studio, South American correspondent on a flying visit to the UK. And Tim, I had lots of questions coming in for you. Just one quickie before we get into those. Michael Beale is the new QPR manager, and he's had quite the footballing journey, including a little spell in Sao Paulo after he left Liverpool. He was at Chelsea as well over the years. But did you come across him while he was there?
We always planned to meet, always. And we were just about to. And the day before we were going to meet, he resigned. He'd had enough. He'd seen too much of the dark side. So we communicated, over social media and so on. And obviously, subsequently, I've followed his career. I wonder what I'd like to sit down with him and ask. Now that he's had a number of experiences subsequently, Rangers and Villa, and now taking over at QPR, I'd love to ask him what that time in Brazil has added to his game. It's a question I asked, say, Clarence Seedorf, because he ended his career in Brazil with Botafogo. What have you got from Brazil that you didn't have before? And he said the calendar, that there's just so many games in Brazilian football that the thing that they excel at is the recuperation of players. So that's something that he took in, and he said this was before the World Cup in 2014. He said he was going to have a word with Louis van Gaal, who was then the Dutch coach, to help Holland in their World Cup campaign, because in the World Cup campaign a lot of travelling, it's a tiring competition, and I'd like to think he did, because Holland came third in that tournament. So I'd like to think that little word in from Seedorf may have made a difference.
Well, a lot of questions coming in about the same three players.
Absolutely loads.
Rafinha, Richarlison and Gabriel Jesus. And maybe the feeling is, Tim, that over in South America, whether they're back home or they're in international duty, they give a bit more of an indication of where they're likely to end up than they do at this end. So, can you shed any more light on those three players? What are you hearing?
Well, certainly the Brazilian media is saying that Richarlison wants to move on. But he's had a few seasons at Everton, and he would now want to move on. Gabriel Jesus also, and he's worried. The priority of Gabriel Jesus, and this is something that makes this entire transfer window a little bit different, is that we've got a World Cup coming up in the middle of the season, and the priority for a lot of these players is the World Cup. And the most important coach in the life of Gabriel Jesus at the moment is Tite of Brazil, not Arteta at Arsenal or Guardiola at Man City. And he's on the fringe. He's had a bad time with Brazil, Gabriel Jesus, ever since the World Cup, where he played it up front and didn't score a goal, and he took that very, very badly. And there's been this feeling ever since that he doesn't want to play at centre forward. He would rather be a wide striker, and that means if Arsenal are chasing him, are they chasing him and Rafinha together? I know they're very different players, but Rafinha likes playing wide right, and Gabriel Jesus, that has been his preference. The Brazil coach told me this. He got with Jesus and he said, "Where do you want to play?" And Gabriel Jesus said, "Don't mind." And Brazilian Tite got quite angry with him. Obviously you mind. Tell me what it is. What is your preference? And rather sheepishly, Gabriel Jesus said, "I'd rather go out wide." So I can't believe that Arsenal will go for both of them, for both Jesus. But Arteta knows Gabriel Jesus from City, although this is a dynamic process, and he hasn't perhaps quite developed in the way that many would have thought. And that's not necessarily a criticism of him. At the time that City bought him, there was a comparison made with the young Ronaldo, the original Ronaldo, by the most impeccable source possible. The original Ronaldo himself.
Really, right.
He said, "This player reminds me of a young me." But he's developed in a totally different way, isn't it? Ronaldo bulked up, was a real powerhouse and was a centre forward. Gabriel Jesus has tended. I don't think he's got the greatest penalty area presence in the world. Very, very good, gifted striker. Wonderful at pressing, and he's tended to do better perhaps in a wider role. So I can't see Arsenal buying in the market for both of them. But I'll be fascinated to see. But anyone who's buying any of these players, you have to factor in that there's something happening in November, December, which is more important to them than anything that's going to happen this club season.
But they'll want minutes on the pitch, won't they?
Yes,
they'll want to play, and that's surely the key.
And that's especially true of Gabriel Jesus, because if the squad was going to be 23, he might not get in. The last game Brazil played, they beat Japan 1-0. Before that, they beat South Korea 5-1, and he scored. And that was his first Brazil goal for 3 years. Now, a lot of that time he's been a substitute, but he's played 20 games. Yeah. That's a long, dry time. So others have got in front of him. So he's sweating on the World Cup place. So he's going to want to play somewhere. And, with City buying in Haaland and Alvarez, you would obviously think he must be worried. Now, because if that sidelines him at City, there's only even if there's 26 places, Brazil have lots of options up front.
I had a question from Adam, who's a Wolves fan. He wants to know a bit more about Enzo Fernandez, plays for River Plate in Argentina. He's been heavily linked to Wolves. What would they be getting if they can pull that off, Tim? Well,
there's lots of interest in him. He's the flavour of the month at the moment. He's getting lots of interest from big Portuguese clubs and from Italian clubs as well. He's a tall central midfielder, very, very elegant. He's involved in all three phases of play. He wins the ball, he distributes, and he shoots as well. He's got goals in him from the edge of the area. He is a little bit restricted to his right foot, a little bit one-footed. You can do that in South American football easier because the game is a bit slower, the pitches are slower, and the lines play further apart. So it's easier to manoeuvre it onto your favourite foot. A lot of the central midfielders have found it hard when they've come to Europe. But he looks very, very classy indeed. I would be surprised if he were to end up at Wolves. Certainly the Argentine media has been saying more Benfica and perhaps Juventus, but he's certainly going to go, if he doesn't go in this window, he'll go in the next one.
Could you ask Tim about Julio Asensio moved to Brighton? That's from Anonymous.
Yeah, Julio Enciso, who's Paraguayan. Okay. What Brighton are doing is interesting because the big European clubs are reluctant to buy straight in from South America. And Real Madrid and that, they'll bring in kids, but quite often they'll leave space for Benfica to do that. Benfica and Porto and so on, they will buy in straight from South America and they will show the player that he can adapt to life and to football in Europe, and then they sell him on at a big profit. That's their business model. They're kind of intermediaries. Luis Diaz is a perfect example. To Porto, from Porto to Liverpool. Brighton, obviously, they don't have the resources of the big Premier League clubs, so they're establishing themselves doing exactly the same thing, to have the courage to buy in from South America. I had very few doubts about Alexis McAllister. I had no doubts at all about Moisés Caicedo. I do have doubts about Julio Enciso, who he's a teenage striker. He's promising. He's mobile. He can operate across the attacking line, but he looks to me at this stage, he's only 18. He's a lightweight, and he's someone who, although he's been in and around the Paraguay squad, it's all promise rather than achievement. So he is a player. I don't think he's anywhere near ready for the Premier League yet. So I'd imagine that he will be loaned here and there, which sometimes I don't like, because he's been the special one in Paraguay. He goes to Brighton and he's loaned off to Belgium or something like that. They can feel a little bit neglected. So I've got more doubts about this than some of the others that they brought in.
This is an interesting one. Right up your street, this Tim. Alexandro Bernabé, he played for Lanús in Argentina, and it looks like he could be going to Celtic. So he warmed up for the move to Celtic by perfecting the Glasgow kiss. His final game against Colón, he stuck the nut on another player and got sent off.
Yeah, perhaps he was inspired by Lanús against Colón. We're not going to go there. There's too many bodily parts involved in that one. They're clearly interested in quick Argentine left backs. So when you asked me the other day about Ortega of Vélez, who apparently they'd also had a look at, I haven't seen Bernabéu for a few months, but I saw much more of him last year, and he's a quick little left back. The first time I saw him, he didn't actually play left back. He played left side of midfield in a 4-2-3-1. He can get in the penalty area, which I like, and there's a nice left foot there, which is also interesting on set pieces. Not the biggest. Physicality might be a problem, but I think he's interesting.
Tim, Tottenham have been linked with Bayer Leverkusen's Ecuadorian player Piero Hincapié. What do we know about him, and is that likely to happen?
One of the times in life when it's great to be wrong is when you think someone ain't going to make it, and he does. A year ago, he'd gone very early from Ecuador to Argentina. And exactly a year ago, Ecuador called him up for the squad for that controversial Copa America that was in Brazil. And the Ecuador coach, he really does go for youth. And Sarmiento of Brighton was playing for Ecuador in World Cup qualifiers before he played for Brighton. And so he threw in Hincapié in this tournament, and every game was a mistake. Every game. I thought, what on earth are you doing?
Yeah.
Come out of that, defenders have to make mistakes in order to learn. You know, there's no other way to do it. Like stand-ups have to die from time to time. You know, it's how you master your craft, isn't it?
Not.
Yes. And went off to Germany, kept his place in the Ecuadorian national side, and he's developed. Excellent for a back three system because he's left-footed and he brings the ball out. He's very proficient at bringing the ball out. He's constructive. My doubt about him is he's a bit spindly. Those little spindly legs, you think he's going to blow over in a stiff breeze. So that would concern me a little bit. You know, there have been centre-backs who have come into the Premier League and struggled physically. That may be a factor, but he's developing very, very quickly, and every time I see him, I like him more.
Okay.
Good stuff.
A couple of Manchester United fans have been in touch. Wanted to know about Evan Nielsen, who plays for Porto.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of money. I mean, he made, most of his career has been spent in Europe, Tim, but I think you may have seen him playing for Brazil age group level.
I saw him play for Fluminense like twice. Okay. He played like 5 or 6 games and scored a couple of goals, and he's on the plane already. So I didn't see enough of him to judge, but it's exactly what we were talking about earlier on. Porto saw that very, very quickly. They saw a penalty operator because he was thrown as a teenager straight into Brazilian First Division and he's scoring goals. All right, we'll have him and buy him. So I've seen like 2 games of him a couple of years ago, which really isn't enough to, that's an even more unqualified opinion than most of mine.
Yeah. Well, I've got one final one for you, and it's very open-ended, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, Tim, but it's from Kevin, who says, could you ask Tim who he thinks is the hottest property in the Brazilian League football at the moment, and which Premier League club would he most be suited to?
Well, it's an easy one. Danilo, the central midfielder of Palmeiras, left-footed central midfielder, who is probably the most effective player in South American football. He's dynamic, left-footed. He was called up to the Brazil squad. He was the only outfield player based in Brazil who was called up to the last Brazil squad. Arsenal wanted him in January. The only reason that didn't go through was that in February, Palmeiras were contesting the Club World Cup, and they didn't want to sell. They don't want to sell in this window, but they're not going to be able to keep hold of him for very, very long. He's developed so quickly, and I think he would be an asset to any Premier League midfield. So Danilo of Palmeiras is the one to watch.
That's the sort of question someone who's playing Championship Manager likes to ask Paul, I think, because they think, I've signed this guy, Danilo, from nowhere. I've done the research.
Yeah. Well, Tim, it's always a pleasure. Lovely to see you. Good luck with your gig tonight. Just remind people where it is. Yeah, it's Soho 21, which is just off Soho Square, right in the heart of London's famous London. Yeah. I think we kick off at 7, so I better scuttle over the bridge and get there in time. Yeah. We'll go and see Tim live then. I say if you're stuck in town tonight for whatever reason, you're staying in town. I will say, Paul, as well, Tim does all that then we've just done. No notes, nothing. Just out off the top of his head, knows it with entertainment and authority. It's absolutely brilliant to watch. Really fantastic to have you here. Thank you very much.